Hey, good evening, all. Apologies for a few minutes late. We've had some technical issues, but good evening from here from central London. I'm excited to jump back on these live streams. So we've been getting a lot of questions since the beginning of spring, and I thought, let me just jump on and share a few things that are happening in the market, both in the rental market and the housing market as well. So. The structure that I want these live streams to go on. I mean, I have an agenda in terms of what I want to share with you, but most of all, and most importantly, is the questions that you guys have. And we're being joined by different platforms, including YouTube and also LinkedIn. And I believe also Instagram. So we're going to get questions from different places, and you may be able to see some of the questions. And if you want to tag along on them, you may not be able to see other questions. So great. So today the structure is I'm going to be sharing with you some big news, big changes in the housing market, but also just some regular housing market updates. So first things first, I'm going to be sharing my screen, and I'm going to be sharing with you the housing market index from Zoopla. So first things first. Hopefully you can see my screen. So housing price index April 2024. So key figures. Now, the biggest thing that I am seeing at the moment is definitely the divide and the difference between house prices and activity between the north and the south, particularly London. And we always knew that was going to happen, especially in the rental market. And what we found actually is always that prime London kind of leads the way, and the rest of the country follows. And that, to an extent, it continues to be true, but more so in the super prime sector, which I'll share a little bit more about further down the video. So, as you can see here, you've got key figures from Zoopla, all property, detached properties. What you can see, that the biggest change that you can see, 0.7% of flats in terms of a price change is the biggest on flats overall in the UK. Now, house prices largely unchanged over the last year. Our latest house pricing that shows that house prices are largely unchanged from March 2024, falling by 0.2%. And again, you can see that from here in these figures. So it is very interesting to see that the flats are the ones that have the biggest change, at least when it comes to the UK. And I hope that you can actually see this from here when it comes to that divide between north and south. Yeah. So our latest house price index shows that house prices are largely unchanged. House prices continue to fall across the southern part of England. So, and I'm actually quite up to date as to what's happening in the north of England at the moment. I like to geek out and see what's happening. And for sure, there continues to be a fair amount of new builds. And there's also that concern on whether they're overbuilding. At the moment, that doesn't seem to be the case. But will it at some point start to become an issue? It reminds me of the times of Spain. I've been in real estate for such a long time, and the reality is that just before the big financial crisis, certain parts of Spain were just overbuilding, and everything was fine because people were purchasing, people were buying, but then it came to a point, the financial crisis, where it all just suddenly stopped, and literally you had neighborhoods and just full buildings that were just vacant completely. And I believe even to today that continues to be an issue. It never actually recovered fully. So I hope this is helpful. And again, I want this to be kind of an interactive video stream. So any questions, please feel free to put it across. That is, if I can find those questions, because I'm still getting warmed up with the whole live stream again. So let me share with you. Let me share with you some more stats. So you got the house price of index, you got mortgage repayments. This is an interesting one, actually. This article I want to share with you. So mortgage repayments up by 60% since 2021. So key takeaways with Zoopla, the total annual mortgage repayments for the average buyer in 2024 have now reached £11,400. In London, that figure rises to more than 23,000 a year. That doesn't surprise me, of course. And buyers in the southeast are paying 16,600 a year, while in the east of England, annual repayments average out at 14,530. Now, one thing I wanted to share, this is actually some interesting figures. So I remember just before the pandemic and also before the financial crisis. Now, the biggest challenge that we had when the financial crisis hit was that there was a certain amount of percentage of people that didn't own their own home. And so, of course, when those mortgage changes happened, when the Bank of England changed the base rate, it was just a challenge for a lot of families and a lot of buy-to-let investors as well. And the issue with that was that a lot of people weren't on fixed mortgages, so they were on variable. So of course, once that base changed, it affected a lot of people. In addition to that, there were a lot of people also that didn't own their own home. I can't remember the exact figure, and I don't want to butcher it, but I'm pretty sure it was something along the lines of the 20%, 25% thereabouts. It's actually amazing to see that right now, today, almost around about 50% in this country actually own their own home. And of course, a large amount of that is going to be homeowners as opposed to buy-to-let investors. But that's a huge number. And that's one of the reasons that I believe, at least, that there isn't going to be a property crash, at least not anytime soon. But again, there are some people that are going to have some major challenges with the changes of the mortgage rates, even this year. If I'm not mistaken, it's something along the lines of 2 million people are going to have that change right now. They're going to be seeing that change, and a lot of them are going to be landlords and buy-to-let investors, and therefore they're going to obviously have a lot of challenge finding where that rent's going to come from. I say rent, the mortgage, and that's why they have to increase those those rents. And a lot of tenants who have good relationship with tenants, landlords with tenants, are having those challenges when it comes to renewals. And I want to share a little bit more about that in a sec. So I'm trying to multitask here with some questions that I can see. When is a good time to buy? That's so in terms of having a lot of, and this is if you're looking to buy a home or you're looking for a buy to let. Now, when it comes to spring and summer, you're going to have much more choice. So a lot of sellers out there decide to actually, I'm going to wait, whether it's, a winter or autumn, and they like to wait until spring and summer to actually put the property onto the market. So you're definitely going to have much more choice when it comes to spring and summer, when it comes to selecting properties. However, there's also going to be a lot more competition. So if you're a family, as an example, and you're wanting to secure a home before the next academic year, before your children go back into school, then there's going to be lots of other families doing exactly the same thing. So you can be strategic and saying, actually, I'm going to look for a home just before spring kicks in so I can be ahead of the crowd. But then you may miss out on some options of properties that are actually going to come onto the market, and you'll only see them in spring and summer. So it has its pros and cons. When it comes to buying property for buy to let, it really depends on how much resources you have out there. When I say resources, I mean contacts with estate agents, and whether you have the resources to be able to find off-market properties. Because personally, and my advice as a professional would be, avoid spring and summer if you can, to be able to buy those properties. But, and there is a big but, if you're able to purchase those properties but complete in around about summer or September, then that's a great strategy as well, because having a property available during these times when you're going to maximize on rent. So let me repeat that. I like to advise people not to have to look for properties and buy properties at the same time that other people are buying when it comes to buy to let and otherwise. But let's stick with buy to let. Now, although I like to buy and buy property for buy to let, not during spring and summer, I like to have the properties available during spring and summer because that's when you maximize on the rent. I hope that's helpful. And I have here another question. So are rents increasing? So yes is the simple answer, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the simple answer is yes, just not at the same rate as it was increasing in the last couple of years. And I have a great example that I want to share with you with regards to that. Okay, so let's see what else we have here to share. I have a few articles for you. So let's start off with the average rent, actually, given that we are on the same topic. There was one mortgage. Okay, here, actually, before we go on to the rental market, there is one topic here that is incredibly important. So mortgage rate increases continue as Nationwide, NatWest, and Santander make hikes. So a lot of people have been asking me, Danny, is right now a good time to remortgage? If I can buy a little bit more of time, is it best to wait because mortgage rates are going down? And this just goes to show that it's not necessarily as straightforward as that. The expectation is that mortgage rates will go down. Will it kind of fall sort of around about the 4.5, at least the base rate? That's the expectation, 4%, 4.5, thereabouts. However, as you can see from today, and this article is from today, Nationwide, NatWest, Santander have all upped their fixed rate mortgage rates. Santander Nationwide increased rates by 25 basis points. NatWest upped interest rates on some of its mortgage rates by up to 22 basis points. So it just goes to show. So again, when people ask me, is right now the best time to remortgage or should I wait? I always like to see what we have now. And if I can make those numbers work, I'd rather to make a decision based on what I know now, as opposed to trying to predict what's happening in the future. It's very likely that mortgage rates are going to go down. That's expectation of a lot of agents and professionals out there. But could there be a few tweaks and up and down during the way? Absolutely. And this is just proof of the same. So the next one I want to be sharing with you, I guess let's go with the market in London, which is always a good place to start. So if I can find the prime London, I had a great little article for you, but overall, here you are. So this is a great article or report, should I say, from Lonres. They are the prime London specialist, and it's always great to dive into their report. Now, this report is from March, showing what's happened in February. We're still waiting for that article to go out for last month, but sales still falling, but spring has sprung for letting. Slight value slump, an active market, instructions on the rise, top end of the market leads the way. So I have part of that report here. Now, the biggest thing that I can see from this is that the super prime market, and I'm talking about 5 million and above, is doing great. There's a lot of activity in that market, and it doesn't surprise me. So if we go on to this little chart here. So if we look at new instructions and you look at this from 20, and remember guys, this is prime London. Prime London being areas such as you've got Hampstead, you've got Kensington, you've got Chelsea, Knightsbridge, Belgravia, and I believe it also has some suburbs there as well, but all prime London. So keep that in mind when you're looking at this graph. If you look at 2015, you can see new instructions were right up there. But if we look at now, sort of 2019, it really went down, started to go up ever so slightly, but we're still low when it comes to 2024. Under offer, as you can see, that slump that goes down before 2019 goes up sort of around about 2020 and 2022, and we are again quite down when it comes to under offer properties. One thing I want to look at here is definitely the prime London market. Let me share with you actually, when it comes to prime London market, there is an interesting example I wanted to share with you, because I think this is really going to give you an indication of where we're at. This is a great example. So this is N1C, guys. And for you that are not familiar with the postcodes in N1C, it's in King's Cross, so St. Pancras. The place has been completely regenerated, very popular with students because there's so many universities around there, specifically when it comes to Asians, and also very popular with the tech people, because there are a lot of sort of, you've got Facebook, Google, that are all nearby. Amazon is also not in King's Cross itself, but very close by. So it's become very, very popular. And you've got a lot of new builds, which is very popular for that type of target audience. Now, I wanted to give you an example. Property like this, which is in N1C. This particular property, if I'm not mistaken, is in the Plimsoll building. Now, you can see the price on this is £4,117. Now, one of the things I wanted to share with you with this, and you may not be able to see my screen, but let me bring this down. I want to take you through a journey of this particular property, because this property back in 2017 to around about 2018 was at a price of £2,950. 2017, 2018, it went up to £3,200. Now, come 2021, it went down to £2,450. So look at that journey. 2,950 went up to 3,200, which, if I'm not mistaken, that brings you to around about, I want to make sure I have my maths right. Yeah, around about 8%. So 2,950 back in 2017 went up to £3,200, around about 7-8%. And then obviously the pandemic kicks in and it goes down to £2,450. Now, that is a decrease of around about 40%. That's huge, right? But then in 2022, as demand starts to come back up, people start to come back into London, then at that point, rental prices start to go up, and this property starts to rent for £3,500. So the reason I'm sharing with you this is because you got to put things into context, right? Anyone who sees this and says, oh, property prices have gone up since 2021, 20, 30, 40%. Well, actually, properties in 2021 were substantially below what was a normal market price. So if you look at that, this property increase from £2,450 in 2021 to £3,500, anyone will say that's a huge increase. Yes, but in real terms, that difference between 2018 and 2022 is actually around about 8-10%. But yes, if you look at it from a 2021 of 2,450 perspective to 3,500 in 2022, then of course you're going to see a 40% jump, which is of course a huge amount. So going back to this property I was sharing with you, this property last year was this year's 3,750. It's coming to the end of the tenancy. This year for 2024 going to 2025 is going to go up to 4,100 as you can see with this. The year before that was 3,500. So just to give you a little bit of perspective on that front. Now, I wanted to jump on the big news and the big change, at least, that we've seen in the last few weeks. And that is, of course, the Renters Reform Bill, and which has finally passed the Commons and is now going through to the Lords, which I'm sure is going to be a much more lengthy process. But overall, what we can say, and apologies because I'm just looking for this here, but overall, what we can see is that this is going through. And there's been a lot of debate and a lot of debates, let's call it. Let me be diplomatic about it. I was watching actually a video the other day from Channel 4 News where there was a debate between Ben, I forget his surname, from the National Landlord Association, and Ben from Rent Generation Organization. And it was interesting to see that neither of them were really happy with the outcome of the Renters Reform Bill. And although one would say the other one had an advantage and the other one would say the same, clearly none of them were happy with the government and the current outcome. So let's look at what the National Residential Landlords Association says. So what happens next? Could be due. Okay, so here are the big changes, or at least what's happening. Here you are. These include commitments to carry out a full review of the courts before Section 21, the so-called no-fault eviction, is abolished. Now, if you're not familiar with the Section 21, it is exactly that. The name's on the tin. It's a no-fault eviction, and it's probably it's definitely the biggest change that they're trying to do right now. Now, this is what Michael Gove promised would be abolished. Has it been abolished? The answer is no, it hasn't, but it will. It hasn't been abolished right now, but again, as you can see here, hopefully you can see my cursor, there needs to be a full review of the courts before this can happen, but it will happen. If it did happen right now without the courts being reviewed, then it'd just be a shambles, to be honest with you, for both tenants and landlords. So, secondly, introduce rules, meaning tenants cannot hand in their 2-month notice within the first 4 months of the tenancy, effectively introducing a minimum 6-month period, which I'm sure is going to be a relief to a lot of landlords because based on the very first proposals, literally what was going to happen was that a tenant, let's say myself, for example, I'm based here in London, and I can just go out to Cornwall, for example, and tell a landlord a little fib and say, actually, I'm looking for a long-term tenancy. The landlord will say, okay, we'll draw up a tenancy. And in fact, my intention was only just to be out there for a month, to be able to just chill out. So that, of course, wouldn't give the security that a landlord would need at the end of the day. You know, you'll end up with people just staying a month or two and then just giving their notice. So this hopefully will give the security that landlords would very much want, which would be at least this is going to form at the very least a 6-month tenancy. The other change was conducting a review of the licensing. So if you've been following the renters reform, there's currently a license being proposed that landlords need a certain license and need to register. And the other one is extend the mandatory possession grounds for student lets to all students' homes. So originally, what had been proposed was that there's going to be an exception for landlords, but only landlords with HMO properties to be able to bring tenancies to an end for students only. And this is, of course, to be able to continue to keep the health of the student industry, which is huge, especially in, excuse me, in big cities and especially places like London. What would be interesting actually to see would be whether the a lot of people, a lot of landlords, knowing that they have this flexibility of giving notice to students, are going to lean more towards renting out, letting out their property to students, and what impact that ultimately is going to have for professionals who, of course, are looking for properties in cities like London. Because currently, the students are somewhat of a preference to landlords, to quite a few landlords, not everyone, of course, for several reasons. They pay more. They come from, a lot of them are overseas students. They can pay more money. And you do have that flexibility with them. Some of them can be quite easygoing in comparison to professionals, and also the fact that there is a turnover, and the landlords like to have that turnover sometimes rather than having long-term tenants. Why that is, I'm not exactly sure. It could be that they use it for their own home, but ultimately, students at times, especially in places like London, are a preference, and whether this is going to be pushing that more towards those students will be interesting to say. So that now, let me see what questions we have here. So, do you think that now's a good time to remortgage? So, yeah, so I believe I've answered that. So, now's a good time as any, at least better than last year. At the end of last year, as we can see, the mortgage rates can move very quickly, and I'd rather have predictability and know what's happening right now in comparison. So, the what should do to prepare for the changes of the rental market? Great question. I think that the first thing is, as a landlord, if you're self-managing the property, is that you definitely join a type of group of landlords that are out there. There's some great organizations, so you could get clued up. There are quite a few courses out there that landlords can take and just keep up to date and just be within that core group, because there is a lot of support between peers and landlords being able to support themselves. So that will be number one. Now, if you don't have the time for that, or just don't want to put the effort into doing all those stuff, then I would definitely recommend that you get yourself a professional managing agent, and ultimately you're going to have the peace of mind that 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 I'm sure a lot of landlords out there want, especially when you have more than 170 regulations, legislations for that you need to comply with, and even more coming in. And the amount of fines that we're seeing is just it's just ridiculous, to be quite frank with you. So, Danny, okay, are there any laws regarding rent increase, and what are the implications of these new reforms on my property rights? So the answer is quite simply yes. So the new legislation that's coming in, which, if I'm not mistaken, there was already a regulation to this. So you can't increase your rent within a 12-month period. So after 12 months, you can increase the rent. Now, I always recommend, even before this law comes in, our tenancies always has that in the contract anyway. I mean, to increase rent within a 12-month period, I believe is completely unfair anyway. It's not something I would suggest. So I think that's completely fair. Now, even after the 12 months, it needs to be in line with market trends. You can't just, put your finger up in the air and say, well, you know what? I've painted the door in gold, and I'm exaggerating here, of course, and therefore, your rent's going to double. You can't do that. It has to be in line with market trends. Otherwise, your tenant can take you to a first-tier tribunal and challenge you. And believe me, you don't want to go down that route. If you're a landlord, if you're a tenant, and you do believe that it's been unfair, then as a tenant, you can go down that route, and it will be a lengthy process, but definitely worthwhile if you are being treated unfairly. Okay, so now we have okay, I have a big fan here, which is great. Thank you, Ancom. Appreciate your support. Always appreciated. Will rent prices continue to go up? So as I shared with you before with the let me look here. Okay, landlords want huge rise in tenant. Okay, so as I shared with you before with the property in N1C, rent rises, average rents climb. Here you are. This is a great article to show you from Rightmove. Average rent climb 8.5% in a year. If you've rented a home in the past few years, you probably have first-hand experience of just how busy the market has been. While we've seen fewer people competing for the number of rental homes available, we've still seen average advertised rent hit 17th consecutive record, climbing to £1,291. So, to answer your question, rents have increased over the course of the last couple of years to 3 years, around the average of 25%. Now, for the last year, it's more on the lower end of that. For the past year, what I've seen on average, the portfolios that we've seen is around about 6 to 8%, which is in line with what Rightmove has shared here. What is interesting is that now the amount of properties in the whole of the UK that have reached the £1,000 per month mark, and for you guys that are based in London, I'm sure you're going to think, well, that's not a lot. But overall, the rest of the UK hasn't seen so many properties reach that £1,000. But we're seeing more and more of those right now, especially in the north, which is, of course, interesting to say. So how much are the average monthly rents where you live? So as you can see, this chart here, London is, if I'm not mistaken, the highest. Yes, it is. £2,600 average rent. The 10 cheapest cities to rent. So any tenants out there, or would-be tenants, especially where there is so much flexibility in today's world, whereby you only have to go into office maybe once or twice a week, or not at all. I mean, I have friends that only go into the office once a month or once every quarter to catch up with kind of directors, big meetings, and that's it. So there is no reason why a lot of people can't just leave London, which has become so expensive, and be able to just commute back into London when needed. And I guess that's the reason why, at the moment, also in the north, and this is the expectation, at least that's what I anticipate, there is still room for growth. So I wouldn't be surprised if I saw double-digit growth in rents further up north. Now, one would ask, well, Danny, then why on earth would I, as a buy-to-let investor, would I invest in London? I would just buy a property or maybe a couple of properties with the money I can buy in London. In somewhere else, again, there is that concern of overbuilding. So knowing where to buy outside of London is going to be critical, but also the fact that you don't get the capital growth that you typically get in London. Where you're going to win in London, you don't invest in London for yield. You invest in London for capital growth. Now, the amount of people that I've seen that purchase property outside of London the last 6 or 8 years haven't, unfortunately, been able to enjoy the capital growth that they have enjoyed with other properties here in London. And that is the major difference. And that is, to be fair, where you make the big money in property. And I say big, for those of you who are in property, it's the long game. And that long game is at the back of that capital growth and knowing where to buy. And that brings me actually to different places to buy in London. And that's perhaps for another video, because we have probably around about 20 minutes, 15 minutes left. And I do want to go through some of these questions. But if you want to find out more about about where would be a good area, a good place to buy property in London, feel free to just leave me a comment, and we'll definitely be able to do a live stream about that. Okay, cool. So I've answered a few questions here. I had jotted down a few others from earlier. So what do we have here? So this was actually from a renter, which is interesting. So we get a lot of relocation, and this might be quite helpful for you guys out there doing looking to buy to let if you're a landlord or if you're a renter coming from overseas. So again, we get a lot of relocation, and I have a question here from someone relocating to London. Should I rent short term let instead of a long term rent to get to know the area and take more time to find the right rent and to build a record of salaries? Okay, so I'm going to divide this in two parts. So first of all, if you're coming from overseas and you don't have a track record of employment here, or at least a contract here, then you're not going to have any other alternative but to pay 6 months to 12 months in advance, and have a UK guarantor. That's just the way it works here. So that's number one. So if we're addressing that number one, if you want to avoid paying that, and you have and you're thinking of securing a job here, and you're confident you're going to secure a job, and you want to avoid paying 6 months, 12 months, then perhaps that would be a good idea. Then rent it out for 3 months, a short 3-month let here, which you'll probably have to pay in advance anyway as well, and build up your salary, your pay slips, and then you'll be able to present that to an agent or to a landlord and be able to rent out then the long-term rent. In terms of getting to know an area, to be honest with you, you'll be able to get a feel of most neighborhoods here in London within a few days. So yeah, if you want to do a short-term let or a hotel for like 5 days or a week, absolutely, I'd recommend that. Or engage with a relocation agent who can also who can definitely be able to support you with that. I know that in the US, it's very popular, for example, to hire relocation and be able to support you with those aspects of looking for a property. And likewise, if there's any investors here from overseas, then that's definitely something that an agent can help you with in terms of helping you to choose the right investment property. So I believe that's pretty much all the questions that I have in front of me. Let me see if I've left any other articles out that I wanted to share with you. But I think that actually, this is an important one for landlords out there. A huge warning, and something that's quite concerning and increasing as well. And this is, of course, at the back of rental increases and rent going just through the roof. And what we're finding is certain applicants telling a little white lie here and there, and perhaps even going to the extent of of fraud, of just making false paperwork to be able to be successful with the application. I mean, I laugh, but it's a nervous laugh. I mean, of course, for someone to be in that particular situation, to go to those lengths to secure property, it just goes to show that we are reaching that ceiling of affordability. A lot of tenants or applicants that we do reference, they're paying sort of 40% or more of their rent, of their salary in rent. And you may ask, well, then how are they successful? They have family members that are supporting them, paying this rent. So landlords warned of huge rise in tenant fraud attempts. An analysis of 600,000 tenancy application has found that fraudulent application rose by 140% last year. The analysis carried out by prop tech supplier Goodlord found that pay slip fraud was the most common way tenants try to trick reference systems. So this just goes to show landlords, just make sure that your agents are doing their due diligence, because as things become more challenging for tenants Of course, they become a little bit more sophisticated, and therefore your agents have to use the right tools and systems that are available out there for them to utilize. So very interesting article. So it says here in 2023 alone, payslip fraud accounted for 58% of all fraud cases detected and caught by good lord. Even one of these slipping through could cost an agent and a lifetime landlord value of £10,000. Interesting. So what else do we have here in terms of article? I think that's really about it. I mean, there is one. What to do landlords and renters think about. What's this? Okay, this is with regards to the Ben and Ben from the rent organization. I guess this one was an interesting as one as well, which was with regard to estate agents overvaluing properties and the state of the market. So it might not be of any surprise to some of you out there that there are quite a few estate agents that overvalue properties, some more than others, unfortunately. That does give a bad name to the industry and the profession. And it's sad to see that some agents really truly, it's their tactic and it's their strategy to actually secure listings from vendors. They go in with a plan to overvalue the property, and they actually have days in the week. The whole office have a day, they even have a name for it, where they have a time block where they call the vendors to bring down and beat that price down, because they know that they've overvalued the property. So they actually work them. They actually consistently and systematically work the vendor to get them prepped for that price reduction, which they knew at the very beginning it was going to need. And that's part of the challenge of what's happening at the moment in terms of the imbalance between buyers and sellers and the expectations. Because when a shift in the market does happen, whether it's a financial crisis of 2008 and 2009, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's a recession, what happens sort of weeks going towards this or weeks after this type of thing, what happens is that buyers and sellers start this standoff and start to have kind of, let's say, concerns as to what's real fair market value. Because from a seller's point of view, they don't want to give it away. And they might start coming to the realization they're not in the same market as before. Great, but they don't want to give it away. And from a buyer's point of view, they're also coming to the realization of, actually, I'm not going to get this for as cheap as I thought I was, but then what's real value? And then there's that balance. And this type of approach to selling properties or estate agents' practice is not very helpful. Estate agents overvaluing homes to gain instructions, helping nobody. This article was just yesterday. By Mark Da Silva. Sellers are being advised to be realistic with their asking price if they want to attract buyers amid slowing housing market. The latest research at getanagent.co.uk suggests that more needs to be done to stop the practice of overpricing homes to win instructions. And I completely agree with this. According to the estate agent comparison site, just 36% of all homes that have seen a price reduction in the current market have been listed as sold, subject to contract. So there you are, guys. In the market at the moment, I want to say it is to an extent a buyer's market. There are properties being sold. Sellers do need to be realistic. It is a price sensitive market. Properties are being sold. There is more movement. There is more activity now than what there was sort of towards the end of the last year. That's purely based on a number of factors, but main factors, mortgage rates have adjusted ever so slightly, even though they increase a little bit. But buyers can make those numbers work now. At least some of them can make those numbers work. And there is more buying going on at the moment. I hope that helps. There is another question. This session has some great information you shared, Danny. Okay, great. I'm glad this has been helpful. Can you guide us on how the abolition of Section 21 affect my ability to evict a tenant? The reality is, once this does become law, your power to evict the tenant is going to be limited to you selling a property. Now, I believe the time frame for this is, let's say you're going to say, Mr. Tenant, I must ask you to kindly leave. The law allows me to ask you to leave, by the way, because I'm selling my property, or I'm moving to the home myself, or a family member is going to be moving in. With that, you can do that. But the law also says, and again, this still has to pass through, also says that you cannot relet that property in a time period of 3 months. So if you ask your tenant to move out on that condition for 3 months, you're not able to let that property. And that goes for long let, but also short let, because there was a loophole on the first proposal that allowed people to do a short let, despite asking the tenant to move out, because you were going to sell your property. So the landlord could have asked the tenant, hey, I need you out, I want to sell the property, and actually put it on a short let for 3 months, and then actually then relet it for a long term again. So yeah, something to keep in mind with regards to that law coming into place. I hope that's helpful in terms of understanding the abolishment of the Section 21 that's going to come into play. I was going to share something else with regards to the Section 21 and the reason why the rent generation are so upset. So currently, with the Section 21 as it stands today, there are, I see two sides of this, because the thing is, I support, guide, and interact with both tenants and landlords, and I see the two sides of this. Yet, when you look at the Section 21 as it stands, it's a more simple vehicle to evict tenants, sometimes for the right reason, but it's just more simple than the other vehicles that exist. An example: a landlord shared with me that they decided to evict their tenant because they weren't complying with their tenancy, including not paying rent, including they were subletting the property, and several other stuff. Anyway, he decided to go down the route of doing things, by the book, and evicting the tenant based on the not paying rent. That took a few weeks, even months. And when it was finally getting to court, the tenant then decided, well, actually, I'm going to pay my outstanding rent, and I'm going to comply with the tenancy. But he had done that a couple of times before. Now, what he had to do then, he then decided to go down the route of Section 21, which if he had done in the first place, if that problematic tenant had then decided to pay the rent anyway, it wouldn't have mattered. The Section 21 would have been valid, and the landlord would have been able to evict that tenant. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. So this is why a lot of landlords decide to take Section 21 and just use it regardless on whether the tenant is not complying with certain aspects, and there is another vehicle. Section 21 is the best one. Now, on the other hand, I've also heard of stories where landlords use Section 21 to evict the tenant simply because they were just far too demanding. The tenant was just far too much, whatever that may mean. Whether that means because the landlord wasn't fixing major issues in a timely manner, whether it was because they were making a fuss because there was a huge rent increase, whatever that may be, landlords then could just take Section 21 and say, well, you know what, you need to leave, and I'm not giving you a reason, but the real reason is because they are again, too demanding. So again, I can see both sides. So I do believe that the current renters reform is a fairer bill, but it needs to exist, and it needs to be able to find the right balance between both tenants and landlords. Have the government found that right balance? Well, should we say that the fact that neither party are happy, that they are both unhappy and upset, does that mean that the government has found the right balance? Could be. Let me know in the comments below. Let me know if they have or they haven't. Thank you so much for joining me. And I expect to do quite a few more of these. So thank you very much. Have a good evening.